Welcome in, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're tackling something you might not expect when you think about nonprofits, and that's intellectual property, or IP. We'll be looking at some notes and excerpts from an article called Nonprofit Intellectual Property Strategy for Impact. And honestly, get ready for some surprises because you might not realize just how much IP your favorite nonprofits actually own and how they use it to really boost their missions. We're talking trademarks, we're talking licensing, even something called geographical indications. So are you ready to get strategic with your nonprofit IP?
Absolutely. I think a lot of nonprofits have a real treasure trove of IP that they don't even realize exists. They have their educational materials, research findings, program models, all these things that are unique and valuable assets, and they really can protect and leverage them strategically.
Okay, so I love that idea of a treasure trove, like it's just sitting there waiting to be discovered. But let's back up for a second. The article really hammers home that IP is not just some legal technicality for these organizations. It's something they need to think about strategically.
Exactly. It's not just about the legalities, it's about empowerment. It's about formalizing what makes that nonprofit unique and impactful. So for example, imagine a nonprofit that develops a really groundbreaking therapy method. Protecting that methodology as IP well that allows them to control how it's used. It ensures quality, and it could even potentially generate revenue to help them expand their reach.
So it's about being proactive and not just reactive, which makes a lot of sense, I think, especially for organizations that are really stretched thin as is. But the article also talks about this tension that nonprofits face between wanting to share their knowledge widely and then also needing to protect certain assets. So how do they find that balance? How do they walk that tightrope?
It's a great question, and it's where things get really interesting. The article actually brings up a fascinating example, OpenAI. They started as a nonprofit, but then shifted to this model called capped profit for funding. And this move actually ignited this whole debate about how do you balance mission with financial sustainability. And what's so fascinating is it's raising these really thought-provoking questions for other nonprofits. Could this kind of creative funding model become more common? And what does it mean for preserving a nonprofit's core values when you start to think about profit?
Yeah, that is a tricky situation for sure. And it makes me think about the different tools that nonprofits have at their disposal, like copyrights, trademarks, licensing. You know, do these tools play a role in finding that balance?
Oh, absolutely. The right tool really depends on the specific asset and the goals of the nonprofit. So, for example, while trademarks often protect logos, they can also protect program names or really unique methodologies that a nonprofit has developed. That makes me think about organizations like Teach for America. I mean, their name and their model are so distinct, and it seems like trademarking those would be a smart move to prevent others from using them in a way that could dilute their brand.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. And trademarks, they can even generate revenue through licensing. Think about the World Wildlife Fund licensing their panda logo. Those funds directly support conservation efforts. But as the article stresses, it's really about aligning your licensing with your organizational values.
Yeah, so no panda logos on products that contribute to deforestation, right?
Yeah.
Makes sense. So speaking of protection, the article also emphasizes proactive IP management, which sounds like a lot to stay on top of.
It definitely is. It's
Hmm.
crucial, though. Being proactive means things like cataloging your assets, registering trademarks, watching out for any infringement, and staying on top of renewals.
Yeah.
It's about taking charge and be organized. And ultimately, this strengthens a nonprofit's position when it comes to partnerships. I can see how that would build trust and credibility with collaborators. So now let's talk about something that I think might worry some nonprofits, digitization. Does putting resources online mean they're losing control?
It's a common concern, but actually it can have the opposite effect. Digitization, when it's paired with proper copyrights and licensing terms, it can actually increase control. Take the Smithsonian, for example. They partnered with indigenous communities to digitize cultural artifacts, and this ensured wider access, but also protected their heritage.
That's a really cool example of how digitization can both preserve and share knowledge.
Mm.
So it's not about clinging to information, but using these IP tools to ensure that it's used responsibly and ethically.
Exactly, said it perfectly. It's about finding that sweet spot between accessibility and control.
Which brings us to licensing, a topic that seems to have a lot of nuances.
It definitely does. Licensing can be a really powerful tool for nonprofits. There's inbound licensing, which allows them to use someone else's IP, and outbound licensing, where they share their own creations with others. So, for example, you have a nonprofit using a patented water filtration technology to deliver clean water. That's inbound licensing. And then you could have a nonprofit licensing their own educational materials to other organizations, and that's outbound licensing.
So both options have their strategic advantages depending on what the nonprofit's goals are. And the article mentions Creative Commons licenses as a successful model for outbound licensing. Can you explain how that works a little bit?
Sure, Creative Commons offers a framework for creators to share their work while still retaining some control. It's a fantastic way to encourage global sharing without completely giving up your IP rights. So it allows the nonprofit to determine how their materials can be used, modified, and distributed, and this ensures their impact while also encouraging collaboration.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like customized sharing, right? So now let's move on to a concept that I have to admit I was completely unfamiliar with before diving into this material geographical indications or GIs.
Oh, GIs are fascinating. They protect products that are tied to specific regions, and they ensure that communities benefit from their unique heritage. So, for example, Darjeeling tea and Kanchipuram silk saris. They have GI tags that protect both their cultural identity and the livelihoods of the artisans who make them.
It's like a stamp of authenticity that benefits both the producers and the consumers, right? But it makes me wonder, could GIs be applied beyond physical products? Could they protect traditional music or dance forms, for example?
That's a really interesting question and one that's being explored in some circles. It raises some complex issues, though, about cultural ownership and the challenges of defining and protecting intangible heritage. But it's definitely an area to watch.
Yeah, it seems like the possibilities with GIs are huge, and it could really be a game changer for preserving cultural heritage. But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about another form of collaboration, open innovation. The article suggests that partnering with outside groups, even for-profit companies, can be really beneficial for nonprofits.
Oh, absolutely. It might seem a little counterintuitive at first, but these partnerships, they can be incredibly fruitful. Collaborations can bring in expertise resources and innovative ideas that a nonprofit might not have access to on their own.
Yeah, I could see how that would be especially valuable for smaller nonprofits, those with limited staff and budgets. Are there any examples of this kind of collaboration working well in practice?
Yeah, actually, the article highlights the Raspberry Pi Foundation. It's a nonprofit that partnered with several for-profit companies to develop affordable technology for education. And it's a great example of how these partnerships, they can create win-win situations. You're leveraging the strengths of both sectors to achieve this shared goal.
That's really inspiring. And it seems like the key to success in these partnerships is having really clear IP agreements from the start.
Absolutely. That's crucial. You want to avoid any misunderstandings or disputes later down the line. Both parties need to know exactly who owns what, how the IP can be used, and how any potential profits will be shared.
So it's all about being strategic, protecting everyone's interests, while still being open to collaboration. This deep dive has been really eye-opening for me. I'm starting to see how IP is so much more than just this legal hurdle for nonprofits. It's a powerful tool for them to amplify their impact and really achieve their missions.
Yeah, it's about moving beyond that perception of IP as this restrictive force and embracing its potential as a driver of innovation and sustainability and ultimately positive change.
I love that perspective.
Mhm.
What do you think is the most exciting aspect of the potential of IP for nonprofits?
For me, it's the potential to level the playing field. IP can help smaller nonprofits compete with these larger, well-funded organizations, giving them a stronger voice and a greater ability to achieve their goals. It's about providing them with the tools they need to make a real and lasting difference in the world.
That's powerful, giving them the tools they need to create real and lasting change. And we've covered a lot of ground today, from trademarks and licensing to geographical indications and open innovation. It's clear that nonprofits, they have a lot of options for leveraging their IP. But for someone who's just starting to think about this, it can feel pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, you're right. It can feel daunting at first. But even small steps can make a big difference. And the first step is simply identifying your IP assets. What have you created? What's unique to your organization? What knowledge programs or innovations do you have that could be protected and then leveraged?
That's a great starting point.
Hmm.
What would be the next step? Once a nonprofit has identified those assets, what should they do?
Then it's about thinking strategically. How can those assets be used to advance the organization's mission? Could you license them to generate revenue? Could they be used to expand your reach or even form new partnerships? Could you leverage them to advocate for policy changes?
So it's about being creative, thinking outside the box, and really aligning that IP strategy with the organization's overall goals.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to seek out expert guidance.
Right.
Intellectual property attorney, they can really help navigate those legal complexities and help develop a really solid IP strategy that's tailored to the nonprofit's specific needs and goals.
It sounds like having that roadmap can make the whole process a lot less intimidating. We've talked a lot about specific IP tools, but is there a core principle that you think nonprofits should keep in mind when they're developing their IP strategy?
One of the most important things to remember is that your IP strategy should always be mission aligned. Every decision about intellectual property should support the nonprofit's core goals and values. It shouldn't be seen as this separate legalistic function, but as an integral part of fulfilling the organization's mission.
That makes perfect sense. IP shouldn't be a barrier to achieving their mission. It should be a tool that helps them reach their full potential. And this deep dive has definitely given me a whole new perspective on intellectual property, especially for nonprofits. It's not just about legal protection, it's about empowering these organizations to do more good in the world.
I couldn't agree more. When it's used strategically and with a clear focus on the mission, IP can be a powerful force for positive change.
It's inspiring to think about all the possibilities. And for our listeners out there who might be involved with nonprofits, this is a call to action. Start thinking about your IP, what you have, and how you can use it strategically to really amplify your impact.
Yeah, it's almost like we've uncovered this secret weapon for nonprofits. One that can help them achieve their missions even more effectively.
In a way, you're right. It's a weapon that can be wielded for good, to safeguard valuable knowledge and amplify their message and ultimately help them make a more significant impact. And thinking back to OpenAI and their shift to that capped profit model, it seems like there's a lot of room for innovation when it comes to funding and sustainability for nonprofits.
Yeah.
Do you think we'll see more organizations exploring these kind of unconventional approaches in the future?
It's definitely a trend worth watching. As nonprofits face more and more pressure to demonstrate their impact and compete for funding, we may see more experimentation with these hybrid models and these creative revenue-generating strategies.
Which really underscores the need for a solid IP strategy, right? To make sure that they can protect their assets and leverage them effectively, regardless of what their funding model looks like.
Exactly. It's about being prepared for this evolving landscape and having the right tools in place to navigate it successfully.
Well, this deep dive has been truly enlightening. I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for the power of intellectual property, especially when it comes to nonprofits.
I'm so glad to hear that. It's a topic that often gets overlooked, and I really hope that our conversation today has inspired our listeners to explore the potential of IP for their own organizations.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise and insights with us today. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of nonprofit IP. We hope you've learned something new today and are feeling inspired to think strategically about your own intellectual assets. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep making a difference.